Think about how our world, the world of factories, cities, and instant global trade actually came to be. Well, it didn't just pop up overnight. It was more like a giant chain reaction, a set of dominoes knocked over by one single world-changing invention. Today, we're going full steam ahead to see how that one little spark ignited the Industrial Revolution and completely reshaped, well, everything.
So here's how we're going to trace this whole story. We'll start with the engine of change, then watch as that leads to the Great Acceleration and the wild boom, crash, bang of a new economy. From there, we'll dive into the radical ideas that shook the world and a conflict we'll call the American Division. And we'll wrap it all up with a new way of seeing, a whole new way of thinking that came out of all this chaos. Let's jump in.
All right, so our story doesn't start in some fancy lab with a brilliant scientist. Nope. It starts deep underground with a really basic, really wet, and really dirty problem that was holding back an entire country.
You see, Britain in the 1700s ran on coal. It was everything. But there was a catch. The deeper you dug for the coal, the more the mines would flood with water. And getting that water out was this massive, incredibly expensive problem.
Before steam power, your only real option was just muscle, teams of people and animals hauling up buckets of water, one by one. It was slow, and it cost a fortune. But then, in 1712, this guy named Thomas Newcomen put together this bizarre-looking machine. It used steam to create a vacuum, which then pumped the water out of the mines. It was clumsy, it burned through tons of fuel, but, and this is the key, for the first time ever, fire was doing the work of muscle. Right there, the modern world was born.
But Newcomen's engine only really worked at a coal mine, right? Because fuel was right there and basically free. The real game changer came a few decades later. A Scottish engineer, a guy named James Watt. He didn't invent the steam engine, but he perfected it. He made it so much more efficient that it suddenly made business sense to use it, well, pretty much anywhere. This was the moment the genie was well and truly out of the bottle.
And with this new, portable power source unleashed on the world, things didn't just speed up a little bit. The world entered this crazy, self-feeding cycle of growth that humanity had literally never seen before.
So what's so cool here is you can see this incredible feedback loop in action. To build these new steam engines for factories, you needed more iron, okay? But the factories and the iron foundries, they needed more coal. And all of this stuff needed to be moved around, which meant you needed railroads and steamships, which, of course, required even more iron and more coal and more engines. It was like this insatiable beast that was constantly hungry for more of everything.
And just look at how fast everything happened. It kicked off with making cotton cloth, but it just exploded from there. All of a sudden, steamboats are chugging up and down rivers, and the entire country is getting stitched together with iron rails. New technologies just kept demanding even newer ones, and whole industries, like the chemical industry, just seemed to appear out of thin air.
Now, this wild ride wasn't some smooth, steady climb. Not at all. It was a violent roller coaster, and it introduced the world to a brand new and often terrifying phenomenon, the boom and bust cycle.
For the average person, this new world could be absolutely brutal. I mean, think about it. One worker in a factory could now do the job of dozens of skilled artisans, so there was always a surplus of people looking for work. This meant factory owners could push wages way down, forcing people to take jobs with just miserable conditions and work these grueling 16-hour days, all just to keep from starving.
And then came the slumps. For the first time in all of human history, the big economic problem wasn't a shortage of things, like a bad harvest. The problem was the exact opposite. The factories had made too much stuff. There was more cloth than people could actually afford to buy. This led to a crash. Factories would shut down, and thousands of workers were just thrown out onto the street. It was a totally new kind of crisis.
So, what was pouring fuel on this fire? Well, it was a new way of dealing with money. It's called fractional reserve banking. And through this process, banks could basically multiply the amount of money flowing through the economy. So look here, someone deposits £1,000. The bank doesn't just let it sit there. It keeps a little bit, a fraction, in reserve, and lends out the rest. That loan then gets deposited in another bank, and the cycle just keeps repeating. That first £1,000 in cash could suddenly become £5,000 of economic fuel.
But here's the catch. The entire system was built on confidence. And if that confidence vanished, say a rumor started that a bank was in trouble, you'd get a panic, a bank run. Everybody would rush to the bank to get their cash out at the exact same time. But of course, the cash wasn't there. It was out being loaned and reloaned. So the bank would collapse, and all that money that had been created would just, poof, disappear, making the crash even worse.
So this chaotic new world, with its incredible fortunes and its soul-crushing poverty, it didn't just produce cloth and iron. It also produced some explosive new ideas about how society itself was put together, and whether it could be put together differently. In 1848, as they watched all these booms and busts unfold, two German thinkers, Karl Marx and Friedrich Engels, published this short, fiery pamphlet. And in it, they argued that all this chaos wasn't random. No, it was a predictable conflict, the latest chapter in what they saw as the long, brutal story of class struggle.
The way they saw it, this new industrial society had split into two huge opposing teams. On one side, you had the bourgeoisie, the capitalists, the owners. They owned the factories, the machines, all the stuff you need to make things. And on the other side, you had the proletariat, the workers. They didn't own anything except their own ability to work. And here's the critical part. Marx said their interests were in direct conflict. The owners want the most work for the least pay. The workers want the most pay for the least work. For one side to win, the other had to lose.
So Marx basically predicted that this conflict was just going to get worse. The capitalists would compete so fiercely that they'd drive each other out of business, leaving just a handful of super-rich owners. Meanwhile, the working class would just get bigger and poorer and more miserable. And eventually, he believed they'd have no other choice but to rise up, overthrow the owners, and take control of the factories for the good of everyone.
Now, while Marx was seeing these industrial forces create a war between classes in Europe, over on the other side of the Atlantic, they were fueling a totally different kind of conflict, one that would eventually tear a nation apart.
You see, the United States was basically splitting into two different worlds. The North was industrializing fast. It was becoming a world of factories, of wage labor, of new ideas like interchangeable parts. The South, though, was a completely different story. It remained agricultural, traditional, and its entire economy was built on the institution of slave labor.
And in a really tragic twist, it was another piece of technology, the cotton gin, that made slavery more profitable than it had ever been. It let one person clean cotton at a massive scale, which was exactly what the textile factories in Britain and in the North were screaming for. So this new invention didn't end slavery. It breathed new life into it and created this huge political push to expand slavery into new territories, setting the North and the South on an unavoidable collision course.
Okay, so to make any sense of this new, complex world of steam engines, bank tanks, and totally different economic systems, thinkers realized they needed a new toolkit. They needed a whole new way of seeing the world.
So instead of focusing on these huge historical conflicts, a new way of thinking called neoclassical economics popped up. And it started small, with individual people. It began with a really simple observation about buyers, which we can see here as the demand curve. And it's super intuitive, right? When the price of something is really high, people buy less of it. As the price drops, they want to buy more. Simple as that.
Then they just flipped it around and looked at sellers. And for them, the logic is the complete opposite. If the price for your product is low, you're not really motivated to make a whole lot of it. But as the price starts to rise, well, now you want to produce and sell as much as you possibly can to rake in those profits. And that gives us this upward sloping supply curve.
And this is the really elegant part. When you put both of those curves on the same chart, they cross at one single point. That point is called the equilibrium. It's this almost magical spot where the amount that buyers want to buy is exactly equal to the amount that sellers want to sell. The market, all by itself, finds a stable price. This simple-looking graph became the absolute foundation of modern economics.
And this is so important. Even Alfred Marshall, one of the brilliant guys who came up with this model, gave a really serious warning. He said, hey, remember, this is just a model. It's a simplified picture of the world. It's useful for sure, but it is not reality itself. And he was really worried that people, especially academics, would forget that.
And that kind of leaves us with a final question to chew on. I mean, the world has changed so much since the 19th century, right? The steam engines have been replaced by microchips, factories by global networks. But have the really fundamental problems they uncovered? How do we handle explosive growth? What do we do about the inequality it creates? And how do we stop the whole system from crashing down? Are those questions really any different from the ones we're still wrestling with today?